In the ancient village of Kamara, where the sun always seemed to rise with a golden blaze and set behind smoke-streaked skies, fire was more than warmth, it was worship. Every home kept a small clay hearth burning, its flame believed to be a fragment of the great fire god, Nthuru, who had gifted humanity the first spark. Children learned to bow before the bonfires during harvest festivals, whispering thanks before tossing dried herbs into the flames. But among them lived one who could not stand the fire's touch, Amara, the girl born during the storm. On the night she entered the world, thunder rolled like a beast in the mountains, and lightning struck the sacred tree outside her mother's hut. The midwife said the heavens had split in two to announce her birth. Yet when the torches were lit to bless the newborn, every flame flickered weakly, shrinking as if afraid. Some called it a bad omen. Others said the fire spirit had recognized one of its own. As Amara grew, her fear deepened. She would not go near the cooking pit, nor hold a candle even during the dark nights. When her mother carried a torch to light the path, Amara would hide her face in her shawl, trembling as the light brushed her skin. The village children teased her cruelly, tossing sparks near her feet, shouting, "Cold one! Cold one!" as she fled to the riverbank. Her grandmother, Mama Nali, was the only one who looked at her differently. "Child," she would whisper while combing Amara's hair by the moonlight, "sometimes fear is memory. You tremble not because fire will hurt you, but because somewhere in your soul, you remember what it once did." Amara didn't understand. All she knew was that every time she saw a flame dance, it felt alive, staring back at her with silent knowing. She often dreamt of a burning field where she stood unharmed while the world turned to ash. The dream always ended with a voice whispering her name through the crackle of embers. Her mother, Naima, loved her fiercely despite the village gossip. When the elders mocked her daughter's fear, Naima stood before them and said, "Fire only fears what it cannot burn." Those words spread across Kamara, becoming both a defense and a curse. The villagers began to look at Amara not just as strange but dangerous, as though the fire's refusal to touch her made her something unholy. One afternoon, when Amara was 13, she followed her grandmother to the communal hearth for the spring ceremony. It was tradition for each family to offer a handful of grain to Nthuru's flame for protection. As Mama Nali stepped forward, she smiled gently at her granddaughter. "Today you must try," she said. "Even the coldest heart must warm itself once." With trembling hands, Amara took the grain. The fire crackled softly, its orange tongues reaching up like fingers. She stepped closer, heart pounding, and as she threw the grain into the fire, the flame recoiled, hissing violently. A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, extinguishing every torch in sight. The crowd gasped. "Bad luck," someone shouted. "The cold one has angered Nthuru again." Amara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She didn't understand why the fire hated her, or why it felt so familiar. Her grandmother gathered her in her arms and whispered, "The flame remembers even if you do not." From that day, Amara stopped attending the fire festivals. She stayed close to the river where the water's coolness soothed her fear. Yet deep in her heart, she knew her fate and the flames were somehow bound, as if destiny itself waited for the day the two would meet again. And far away, beneath the sacred mountain where the eternal fire of Nthuru burned, a flicker of light flared brighter, as though the god himself had awakened at the sound of her name. Each year, when the first red moon rose above the hills of Kamara, the people gathered for the festival of cleansing flames, a night when sin and sorrow were said to burn away in the holy pyre of Nthuru. The villagers prepared for weeks, painting their bodies with clay, weaving fire-colored beads into their hair, and crafting torches wrapped in dried palm leaves. To Kamara, fire was not just light, it was judgment, rebirth, and truth. Drums echoed through the valley as dusk fell. The bonfires roared to life, their flames climbing high enough to kiss the stars. The elders stood in a circle around the central pyre, each holding a bowl of sacred oil. They chanted in the old tongue, calling the fire down from the heavens. As the villagers danced barefoot around the flames, they threw in their offerings, tokens of guilt, grief, or broken promises, believing that Nthuru would forgive them through the cleansing heat. But that year the fire burned low. The pyre sputtered, its light pale and unsteady. The people murmured nervously. Some said the fire was tired. Others whispered that the fire god had turned his face away. When the high priest, Elder Kygo, stepped forward, his face was painted crimson and his eyes glowed with conviction. He raised his staff carved from volcanic stone and shouted, "The flame grows weak because one among us rejects its power." A ripple of fear spread through the crowd. Kygo's voice carried the authority of tradition and terror. He turned slowly, scanning the faces illuminated by the flickering light. "Nthuru feels defiance," he declared. "The sacred flame cannot burn purely while a cursed soul lives among us, a soul that fears what must be worshipped." Whispers began immediately. "The cold one," someone muttered. "It must be her." Amara stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching her shawl. The fire's glow shimmered across her dark skin, but she could not step closer. Her heart pounded as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Even those who had once pitied her now looked at her as if she were the reason their crops had failed or their wells had dried. Kygo extended his staff toward her. "You," he said, his voice slicing through the chanting. "The one who hides from the flame. You offend the spirit of Nthuru with your fear. The fire that blesses us grows weak because of your shadow." Amara shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never meant harm," she whispered. "I only—" "Silence," Kygo thundered. "Fear of the sacred is blasphemy. You have brought coldness to our hearts, and the god demands balance." He dipped his staff into the bowl of sacred oil and let a few drops fall into the struggling fire. The flame hissed, then flared bright red for a brief, unnatural moment. The crowd gasped. Kygo lifted his hands to the sky and proclaimed, "The sign is clear. The fire god himself calls for her purification. At the next full moon she shall be cleansed by the sacred fire." The villagers cheered, not out of cruelty but out of fear. In Kamara, when the god spoke, humans obeyed. Amara felt her knees weaken. Her mother rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her, crying, "No! She's done nothing wrong." But Kygo's guard seized Naima by the wrists and held her back. The high priest turned away, his shadow tall against the trembling pyre. As the drums continued their relentless rhythm, Amara stood motionless, the firelight dancing on her tear-streaked face. She could feel the heat licking at her bare feet, not with pain but with strange recognition. Somewhere deep inside, something ancient stirred, a pulse that answered the flame's whisper. While the villagers danced and chanted her doom, the fire suddenly crackled louder, brighter, as if laughing. And though no one noticed, its glow reflected perfectly in Amara's eyes. The night after the festival of cleansing flames was thick with whispers. The drums had long stopped, yet the echo of their rhythm lingered in the air, a heartbeat of fear pulsing through the village of Kamara. Inside her mud-walled hut, Naima knelt before the small household flame. Her tears hissed as they fell into the embers. "Nthuru," she whispered, "you are the witness of truth. Spare my daughter, for her heart carries no defiance." But the fire did not flicker, it only watched her in silence, its orange glow seeming to judge her plea. Outside, the village buzzed with cruel anticipation. People said the fire god demanded sacrifice, and to disobey would bring drought, disease, and ruin. No one dared speak against Elder Kygo, the high priest whose words were as final as the gods. Yet there were rumors, murmurs that Naima herself had once defied Kygo's authority. Long ago she had refused to let her husband's ashes be burned in the temple pyre, choosing to bury him by the river instead. Since then Kygo had carried a quiet resentment toward her family. Desperation grew in Naima's chest like a storm. That night, as the moon rose thin and pale, she made her choice. She gathered Amara's few belongings, a woven shawl, a clay charm from her grandmother, and a pouch of dried herbs, and whispered, "We will leave tonight before the dawn remembers our names." Amara's hands trembled. "Mother, they will find us." Naima cupped her daughter's face. Better to die running than to die in fire. Under the cloak of darkness, they slipped through the narrow alleys of Kamara. The village slept beneath the sound of crickets and faraway thunder. Naima led her daughter toward the northern hills, where the forest met the sacred river, a place even Kygo's guards feared to go. But betrayal waited in the shadows. A familiar voice hissed behind them. "Sister, where are you going with the girl?" Naima froze. From behind a tree stepped Sephu, her own brother. His face was half lit by the torch he held, and in his other hand, a leather pouch jingled softly, heavy with gold coins. "Sephu," Naima whispered, horror tightening her throat, "you promised to help us." He looked away. "Kygo gave me a choice, my life or yours. You know the priest's power. I have a family to feed." Before Naima could speak again, armored guards emerged from the darkness. They seized Amara by the arms, her cries muffled by rough hands. Naima lunged toward her daughter, clawing at the soldiers, but the torch in Sephu's hand flared brightly, blinding her. "Take them to the temple courtyard," Sephu said, his voice cracking. "The priest awaits." The guards dragged them through the dirt streets, their footsteps echoing against the silent huts. By the time they reached the temple gates, the horizon had begun to pale with dawn. The grand fire pit stood waiting, its embers still glowing from the festival. Naima fell to her knees before Kygo, who stood surrounded by chanting priests. "Please," she begged, her voice raw, "she is just a child. Spare her and I will take her place." Kygo's eyes were cold as obsidian. "The fire does not take substitutes. It will consume what the god chooses." Amara screamed as the guards pushed her toward the courtyard center. Her mother broke free for a moment, running to her, but a soldier struck her down with the butt of his spear. Naima collapsed, blood spilling onto the dry earth. The ground shuddered. A rumble rose from the mountains, rolling through the valley like an approaching storm. The fire pit roared to life, its flames leaping high into the air as if tasting the scent of blood. The priests stumbled back, crossing themselves in fear. Kygo turned to the sky, his voice trembling for the first time. "The god accepts the offering." Amara's scream pierced the dawn, not just of sorrow but of awakening. For as her mother's blood soaked into the ground, the air around her shimmered, and deep within the heart of the fire, something ancient began to stir. The flames that awaited her were no longer hungry. They were aware. The night of the full moon arrived like a predator circling the village of Kamara. Shadows stretched long across the temple courtyard, where the high pyre had been prepared. Torches blazed, casting flickering gold upon the stone walls and mud huts that surrounded the sacred ground. The villagers gathered in hushed anticipation, a restless ocean of faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Whispers of fear and fascination passed like sparks. "The girl will burn. The fire god will be pleased. No one survives Nthurue's judgment." At the center of the courtyard, Amara was bound to a wooden post, her wrists tied with thick ropes that cut into her skin. Her dress, simple and white, hung in tatters, already smelling faintly of smoke. Around her, Elder Kygo and the chanting priests circled like predators preparing a ritual sacrifice. Bowls of sacred oil glistened in their hands, dripping slowly into the embers below. The fire pit had been replenished, the flames reaching hungrily toward the sky, crackling in anticipation. "By Nthuru," Kygo intoned, his voice deep and unwavering, "you shall be cleansed. Your soul will burn, and the village shall be rid of your blasphemy." Amara's voice trembled, her scream barely audible above the drumbeat of the villagers chanting. "Please? I never—" But the words were swallowed by the rising fire. Oil was poured over her, the liquid shimmering like molten glass in the torchlight. Torches were brought close to the pyre, and with a single strike of flint, the flames roared higher, licking at the ropes and the edges of her dress. The villagers cheered, some with joy, others with nervous trembling, certain that the ritual would claim the girl's life. And then, nothing. The fire hesitated. The flames, which should have leapt hungrily toward her, paused mid-air as if sensing something alive in her presence. Amara's scream faltered, turning first into silence, then into laughter, a sound pure, bright, and terrifying all at once. The laughter echoed off the stone walls, reverberating into the night. From the center of the pyre, the flames rose like golden serpents, circling her as if guided by invisible hands. Ribbons of fire wrapped around her, yet did not burn. Her bindings charred and fell away, leaving her free, her skin untouched by the sacred oil or the roaring heat. Her eyes glowed, molten gold reflected in the pupils of every onlooker. For the first time, the villagers saw not a terrified girl, but a force beyond their comprehension, a queen of fire herself. The priests faltered, murmuring spells and prayers to calm the inferno, but the flames were beyond their control. They leapt from torch to torch, engulfing the roof of the temple in roaring tongues of light. Smoke spiraled into the sky, and the villagers fell to their knees, shielding their faces. Kygo screamed for the fire to obey him, striking at it with his staff, but it danced around him, unyielding as though mocking the futility of mortal authority. Amara lifted her hands slowly. The fire answered, swirling in elaborate patterns, forming shapes that resembled wings, serpents, and finally a crown of embers above her head. She breathed deeply, and the wind itself seemed to bend to her will, carrying sparks into the night like stars scattering across the heavens. The air crackled with power, electric and alive, and even the bravest villagers felt their knees weaken beneath them. The flames whispered to her, voices of the ancient fire god Nthuru, speaking in tongues she had never heard but instinct. "You feared me, yet you are mine. You are not to be consumed, you are to reign." In that moment, Amara's soul fused with the fire. She was no longer a girl afraid of flames. She was their mistress, their queen, their living embodiment. Every ember, every spark, Every flicker of the pyre obeyed her silent command. The villagers gasped, some in awe, some in terror. The temple, once a place of mortal ritual, had become a throne for a goddess forged from smoke, flame, and vengeance. And high above, the moon hid behind a veil of clouds, as if even the heavens were unwilling to witness the birth of the Fire Queen of Kamara. The temple of Kamara groaned and shuddered as if the earth itself recoiled from the flames that now ruled the night. Timber cracked and splintered, stones toppled from their foundations, and sparks flew high into the sky, painting it in fiery streaks that mirrored the chaos below. Yet through it all, Amara walked unharmed, her bare feet touching the scorched earth without pain, her hair and dress untouched by the roaring inferno. Around her, flames twisted and danced, following her every movement like loyal hounds. They licked the walls and roof, curling around the fleeing priests, yet never touching her. Every step she took left trails of golden embers in the air, floating like fireflies caught between worlds. The villagers watched from the outskirts, frozen with awe and terror. Some fell to their knees, muttering prayers to Nthuru, while others whispered, "She is no longer human, she is the daughter of the fire god himself." Elder Kygo stumbled backward, his staff falling from his hands as the temple altar split in two with a deafening crack. Lightning tore across the sky, striking the altar and sending jagged shards of stone and molten metal tumbling to the ground. The villagers screamed and scattered, the drums of the festival now drowned beneath the roar of the storm. Amara did not flee. She paused at the edge of the burning temple, looking back at the destruction wrought by those who sought to consume her. A strange calm settled over her as a voice whispered through the crackling flames, carried on the wind. "You feared me because you were me." The words penetrated her very soul. She fell to her knees, the fire around her intensifying, warm and alive like a living presence. Memories not her own surged through her mind, visions of a past life where she had been the guardian spirit of fire. She remembered the forest she had protected, the mountains she had ignited to chase away predators, the rivers she had warmed to aid growth. She remembered the mortals who had betrayed her, using her gift to destroy rather than nurture, burning villages and forests without thought. Tears mixed with the soot on her cheeks as her heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the flames. The fire's voice whispered again, this time sharper, more intimate, "You are not to be destroyed. You are to be reborn. Your fire will judge those who betray it as it once did in the heavens." In that moment, Amara understood the truth of her existence. Her fear of flames had never been weakness, it had been remembrance, a mark of the bond between her soul and Nthuru. The fire had watched over her, waiting for the day she would reclaim her power. She rose slowly, and with each movement, the flames around her surged higher, forming a protective halo. Her eyes blazed with molten gold, reflecting the storm above. The villagers gasped as she stepped forward, unbound and free, and the forest ahead seemed to part for her arrival. Shadows twisted and elongated as though paying homage to the awakened spirit passing through their midst. As Amara entered the forest, the night seemed to sigh in relief. The trees bent slightly, their leaves catching the fiery glow, illuminating a path deeper into the wilderness. There, in the stillness between the rustling branches, the voice of Nthuru spoke once more, "Your fire has returned to you. Reclaim it. Let the world remember that the flames obey only the worthy." Images of betrayal, injustice, and past victories flooded her mind. She saw the faces of those who had wronged her mother, the priests who had condemned her, and even the uncle who had sold her to death for gold. Each memory sparked within her, merging with the fire in her soul. The anger and grief that once made her tremble before a flickering lamp had transformed into a weapon, a living, breathing force of judgment. Amara knelt at the forest floor, the embers of her own power rising around her like a crown of light. She whispered a vow that would carry across generations, "I will not fear the flame. I am its master. Those who betray will burn in their own lies." From that night forward, she was no longer simply Amara, the girl who feared fire. She was reborn as the fire spirit in human form, her destiny intertwined with Nthuru. The storm passed, but the memory of lightning striking the altar and the temple's collapse would remain with the villagers forever. A warning that some souls, once awakened, cannot be bound or consumed. And high above, the moon peeked through the dissipating clouds, casting a silver light on the forest path, as if to honor the rise of the daughter of Nthuru. Days passed in the village of Kamara, and what was once bustling and vibrant began to rot under a silent, creeping doom. The fields, once green with millet and sorghum, shriveled under the unforgiving sun. Leaves curled like scorched paper, and the river that had always nourished the village flowed thin and sluggish, as if hesitant to give life to those who had betrayed the fire. The villagers' lungs tasted of smoke and ash, carried from the temple ruins and lingering like a ghost across the land. The elders gathered in the central square, their robes dusty and sweat-stained, eyes darting nervously toward the remnants of the festival pyre. Whispers filled the air, rising and falling like restless spirits. The fire, it is gone. Without the flame, our rituals are meaningless. Amara, she has taken it back. Elder Kygo, once commanding and immovable, now trembled like a reed in the wind. He knelt before the empty altar, his staff shaking in his hands. He tried again and again to summon flames, striking flint against steel, chanting the sacred words of Nthuru. Yet every spark he produced disintegrated into dust before it even touched the ground. Smoke curled into nothingness, leaving behind only the bitter scent of failure. The villagers watched in mounting terror as their highest priest, the keeper of the fire, could no longer wield it. Children began to fall ill. High fevers and coughs spread through the streets. Mothers wept as they carried their little ones to wells that no longer offered water, to hearts that no longer promised warmth. The elders' cries for intervention were met with silence, the village's very soul seeming to recoil from them. People whispered, trembling, that the fire spirit had reclaimed her warmth, that Amara, once the girl they mocked, now commanded the heat of life itself. Kygo's face, once pale from ritual makeup, now wore the ashen hue of fear and guilt. He could not understand why the fire obeyed her alone, why every attempt to restore it failed. His mind raced, haunted by the image of her molten gold eyes and the crown of embers she had worn during the night of burning. Desperation gnawed at him. If the child they had condemned could command the flames, perhaps she could also temper them, if only she would hear them. With a voice cracking under the weight of his terror, Kygo summoned his bravest warriors. "Go to the forest," he commanded, "and plead for her forgiveness. Beg the daughter of Nthuru to spare our village. Bring back the fire." The warriors set off under the thin light of dawn, venturing into the dense forest where shadows clung like living things. Hours turned into days and still none returned. The villagers waited, their fear growing, their hunger gnawing, their faith in their priest crumbling. Only the wind answered, carrying a dry, hot breath that whispered her name. Amara, Amara. Every evening, the villagers would gather at the ruins of the temple, watching the empty pyre. They struck torches against stone, hoping for even a flicker, but the sparks dissolved into ash mid-air. Mothers clutched their children, whispering warnings that fire now belonged to a higher power, a soul beyond their comprehension. The animals of the forest seemed to recognize it too. Birds flew silent and erratic, and the cattle huddled nervously in their pens as if the heat of judgment was invisible but ever-present. Kygo, once feared and revered, now sat hunched beneath the shadows of the village square. Every gust of wind brought the whisper again, searing into his mind, "Amara, you mocked the flame, now it mocks you." It was then that the villagers understood. Their beloved fire, the sacred flame that had warmed their homes and judged their sins, no longer belonged to them. It had returned to its true master, the girl they had tried to burn. And though the forest hid her, her presence was everywhere. In the air that scorched their skin, in the ash that fell silently, in the wind that carried her name. Kamara had survived famine and drought before, but never the silence of fire itself. And deep in their hearts, every man, woman, and child knew that the daughter of Nthuru had begun her judgment, and that no mortal power could halt it. The night was unusually still in Kamara, a silence that pressed against the villagers' ears and hearts like a warning. No crickets chirped, no wind rustled the trees. The crops that had survived the drought trembled in the faint moonlight. From the horizon, a glow appeared, subtle at first, then growing with every heartbeat. It was neither torch nor lightning. It pulsed like a living thing, moving closer with a rhythm that mimicked fire itself. The villagers gathered in the central square, their faces pale and fear-stricken. Mothers clutched their children, men gripped spears they knew would be useless, and Elder Kygo knelt on the cracked stone steps of the ruined temple, whispering prayers he barely remembered. The glow resolved into a figure, Amara, cloaked in embers that swirled around her like a living mantle. Her hair floated as if lifted by invisible flames, and her eyes burned molten gold, piercing the shadows. Each step she took left trails of fire behind her, yet the grass and soil beneath her feet remained untouched, as if even the world itself recognized her authority over the flames. A hush fell across Kamara. The villagers could feel the heat of her presence, not in pain but in raw power. A warning, a promise, and a judgment rolled into one. Amara stopped at the center of the square. She raised her head, letting her gaze sweep across the frightened crowd, then spoke, her voice resonating like crackling wood and the roar of a distant bonfire. Kygo. The high priest trembled, rising from the steps as if called forward by a force beyond his comprehension. His robes clung to his sweating body, and his staff shook in his hands. Amara. He stammered, but the words faltered under the weight of fear and awe. Flames leapt from the air, spiraling around him in a golden vortex. He tried to raise his hands, trying to command them, but the fire answered only her. It twisted, dancing, reflecting the judgment that had been long delayed. You burned the innocent, Amara said, her voice calm but laced with the weight of divine wrath. You used the sacred fire to punish what you did not understand. Now, she raised her hand, and the fire intensified, forming whirling ribbons that encircled him completely. Now burn in your own lies. Kygo's screams pierced the night, but the fire did not consume him in the usual sense. Instead, the flames seemed to extract his guilt, twisting it into sparks that rose into the sky. Those sparks shimmered in the moonlight, and as they floated upward, formed words, bright and fleeting. Forgive me. Amara lowered her hand. The flames softened, scattering into embers that the wind carried across the valley. The words lingered in the air for a moment longer, then disappeared, leaving only silence. The villagers shivered, realizing that this was no ordinary fire. It was a living, sentient force, bound to a spirit they had once tried to destroy. She turned her gaze to the remaining villagers who cowered beneath the moonlight. Let this be a warning, she said softly, her voice now like the gentle warmth of a hearth. Those who misuse sacred fire, who punish the innocent, will answer to the flame. Without another word, Amara turned and walked toward the horizon, the embers of her cloak trailing behind her. The wind carried the sparks far into the forests and mountains, and wherever they fell, the land seemed to hum with the echo of her power. The villagers watched, mouths open, as the last glow disappeared into the distance, leaving only the shadowed village and the memory of divine retribution. That night no one slept. They whispered of the daughter of Nthuru, the girl who had been burned yet had become fire itself. Her name was spoken with reverence and fear, a legend reborn in the embers, a warning that would endure for generations. Kamara had witnessed the return of its flame-bearer, and the memory of her judgment would burn in their hearts forever. Dawn broke over the village of Kamara, but it was no ordinary morning. The sky burned with shades of crimson and gold, reflecting the fire that now moved not as destruction, but as a living, guiding force. Amara walked through the streets, her molten gold eyes surveying the land with quiet authority. Her presence alone commanded the flames, which shimmered and danced around her like loyal spirits. The smoke that had lingered for days now parted gracefully, following her as she moved. The village itself seemed to breathe under her steps. The houses of those who had shown cruelty, the merchants who hoarded grain, the elders who enforced unjust laws, the relatives who had betrayed her, were consumed by fire. But it was a careful, deliberate burn. Flames that did not merely destroy but purified. Wooden beams crackled and fell into ash, rotten walls collapsed, and the dark stains of corruption seemed to evaporate in the heat. In contrast, the homes of the kind-hearted glowed with a golden light, unscathed. The villagers who had once feared her looked on, astonished. They saw smoke curl gently around their homes, not as a threat, but as a protective mantle. The air, heavy with ash, now smelled faintly of incense and warm earth. Amara knelt at the center of the village, before the ruins of the broken temple altar. Her fingers traced the cracks left from lightning and fire, and tears fell from her eyes. But these were no ordinary tears. They shimmered like molten lava, each drop hissing as it touched the scorched stone. Slowly they sank into the fissures, sealing the broken altar as if it were breathing again. Let fire heal, not harm, she whispered, her voice carrying across the square. The villagers held their breath, some kneeling, some falling to the ground in awe. They could feel the warmth in her words, a heat that did not scorch but comforted, reminding them that the flames were not merely an instrument of vengeance. They were sacred, alive, and merciful. As she rose, the sky above Kamara glowed a deeper crimson. Then the clouds shifted and warm rain began to fall. It was unlike any rain the villagers had felt before, soft, caressing, and fragrant with the scent of earth and ash. Each droplet landed on the village, steaming gently as it touched the charred ground. Where the flames had purged rot, the rain transformed the ashes into fertile soil. Green shoots began to emerge almost instantly, as if life itself had been waiting for this moment of purification. Children ran barefoot through the streets, laughing as smoke rose gently beneath their feet. They splashed in puddles that smelled faintly of fire and earth, playing in a world renewed by both destruction and mercy. The adults, some trembling, some crying, realized that the flames which had once been feared as an enemy were now their guardians, guiding them toward justice and harmony. Amara's gaze swept over Kamara one last time. The corruption had been purged, the innocent protected, and the village had learned the true nature of fire, not as punishment but as balance. With a gentle nod, she lifted her hands, and the flames rose in a spiral of gold before dispersing into the sky, leaving behind a village bathed in warm sunlight. The villagers whispered her name in reverence. The daughter of Nthuru, the fire spirit who had walked among them, judged and healed. From that day on, the people of Kamara honored the flames not with fear, but with respect, knowing that the fire could both destroy and create, that it could punish and protect, and that the true power of the flame belonged to those pure of heart. And in the heart of the village, where the broken altar now stood whole once more, the warmth of fire lingered, a guardian and a promise that the spirit of Amara would always watch over them. Night fell over the village of Kamara, but Amara could not rest. The fire within her burned bright and restless, glowing beneath her skin like embers in a dark hearth. She lay on a bed of softened ash at the edge of the forest, the smoke curling lazily into the sky, and drifted into a deep, unnatural slumber. In her dreams, the world shifted, the forest, the village, the temple, all dissolved into a realm of swirling light and shadow, and there she stood before a council of ancestral spirits. The spirits were formidable, glowing with ethereal fire of their own. Their eyes reflected both wisdom and judgment, and their voices rose and fell like the rhythm of distant drums. At the center sat her ancestors, each a figure of power and dignity, their forms flickering between human and flame. One by one they questioned her. "Why do you wield the fire with such wrath?" asked one, her voice like the hiss of molten metal. "Is this justice, or vengeance?" intoned another, their gaze searing into Amara's soul. Amara trembled but held her ground. She saw the faces of the villagers, the priests, her uncle who had betrayed her mother, and the fear she had once carried. All of it had driven her to unleash the flames, yet the spirit's questions cut deeper than any torch. The heat of her own power now felt heavy with responsibility. The spirits whispered truths she had yet to comprehend. Fire, they said, could purify or destroy, illuminate or consume, depending on the heart that wielded it. They reminded her of her birth under a storm, her mother's protection, her own fear of flames, all signs that she was not merely human, but a guardian of balance, chosen to restore the natural order of flame. Then her mother appeared in the dream, radiant and soft, yet impossibly alive. Her voice was gentle but carried the weight of eternity. "Amara," she said, reaching toward her, "you were not chosen to punish but to awaken. Fire is a reflection of the soul. Let it teach, not terrify. Let it heal, not harm." Amara felt tears burn her eyes, not of sorrow but of clarity. The glow of her own fire dimmed from blinding gold to a gentle ember, the first flicker of restraint in the power that had once been uncontainable. She realized the truth: her mission had never been revenge. Her wrath had been a teacher, showing the consequences of cruelty. The fire she commanded was not hers to wield in anger, but hers to balance, to guide, and to protect. When she awoke, the first rays of dawn touched the ashes around her. Her eyes, once molten gold, now glimmered like embers, alive, warm, but controlled. She walked to the edge of the forest where her mother's ashes had been kept. Gently she scattered them beneath a flame lily, a rare flower that thrived where fire and earth met. Each petal shimmered as if absorbing the last traces of her grief, and the soil beneath seemed to breathe life once more. She knelt, whispering a vow to the wind, to the fire, and to her mother. "Never again shall I let fire serve cruelty. Let it cleanse, let it awaken, let it guide. I am its guardian, and I will honor its balance." From that day forward, Amara carried the fire not as a weapon, but as a force of equilibrium. The villagers of Kamara would remember the blaze that had purged corruption, but they would also remember the daughter of Nthuru who had learned that true power lies not in destruction, but in balance, wisdom, and the careful guidance of the soul. And as the flame lily swayed in the morning breeze, the fire within Amara glimmered steadily, a quiet, eternal reminder that the spirit of justice need not roar to be powerful, and that the heart of fire burns brightest when tempered by love and purpose. Years flowed like molten gold over the village of Kamara, and the memories of fear and ashes gradually transformed into stories of reverence. Where the old temple had once stood as a monument to judgment and pain, Amara now began the work of rebirth. She did not rebuild it with cold stone or towering walls meant to intimidate. Instead, she used clay and sun-baked bricks, weaving warmth into every corner. The roof curved gently, letting sunlight filter in during the day, and at night, lanterns glowed softly, mirroring the gentle flicker of the eternal flame within. Children ran through the newly built courtyard, laughing as Amara taught them the ways of fire. "Do not fear it," she said, her hands hovering above the flame without touching, "but respect it. Fire is life, fire is truth. Light it to warm the cold, to heal the broken, to illuminate what is hidden. But never light it to harm." Her eyes, still glowing faintly with ember gold, reflected the flickering flame and the excitement of the children surrounding her. The villagers watched her with quiet awe. Those who had once mocked, betrayed, or feared her now knelt in gratitude, offering gifts of fruit, herbs, and small trinkets to honor her guidance. Pilgrims began arriving from distant lands, drawn by tales of the miracle flame that burned without consuming. They came to witness a fire that obeyed the heart behind it, a flame that purged not by wrath but by understanding, and to learn from the keeper who had transformed her wrath into wisdom. Amara welcomed them all, patient and radiant. She guided them through the rituals of respect, teaching them how to honor the flame with intention, not fear. She showed them how to light it to nourish the earth, to cook meals, to warm the cold hands of travelers. The flame responded, dancing higher when touched by truth and kindness, dimming when approached with greed or cruelty. It was alive, but under the guidance of a soul tempered by experience, it no longer burned indiscriminately. Even the forests and rivers surrounding Kamara seemed to recognize the harmony that had returned. Birds nested near the temple, animals wandered freely, and the wind carried the soft scent of smoke mingled with earth and blossom. The villagers spoke of Amara not as a fire wielder, not as a spirit to fear, but as a savior of light, the one who had tamed the chaos of fire and restored balance to their lives. Amara understood the lesson the fire had taught her. The sacredness was not in the flame itself, but in the will of the soul behind it. A pure heart could guide destruction into creation, a compassionate hand could turn fear into reverence. The temple became a school of wisdom, a sanctuary of light, where generations learned that power, tempered with purpose, becomes immortality. On quiet nights she would walk through the courtyard, her bare feet brushing the warm clay floor, and watch the flame flicker without consuming. She smiled, remembering the girl who had once trembled at a candle, the child who had faced betrayal, and the spirit that had risen from ashes to claim her true purpose. Now that spirit guided all who came to Kamara, ensuring that fire, life, and soul walked together in harmony. And so, the flame temple stood reborn, not as a monument to fear but as a beacon of balance, teaching that the true miracle was not the fire itself, but the wisdom, courage, and soul that guided it. Amara passed her teachings to every child, every villager, every pilgrim, leaving a legacy that would burn in memory long after the embers cooled. A legacy of light, justice, and the eternal, tempered fire of the human spirit. Decades passed, and Amara aged as all mortals do, though the fire within her spirit had burned brighter and longer than anyone could imagine. Her hair, once black as night, now shimmered with streaks of silver, yet her eyes still held the faint glow of molten embers, a reminder of the divine power she had once awakened. She walked through the village one last time, her steps slow but deliberate, as villagers of all ages followed her in respectful silence. The houses of Kamara now thrived, lush gardens growing where once there had been ashes. Children laughed in the streets, echoing the joy of a village healed, but today they sensed a difference. The air was charged with anticipation, as though the land itself knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. Amara ascended the steps of the flame temple, which she had rebuilt from clay and sun-baked bricks, and stood before the eternal fire she had once awakened. "Fire," she said, her voice strong despite the frailty of her body, "will always test those who touch it. It can purify or destroy, uplift or punish. But remember this, only the pure of heart will walk through it unburned." The villagers knelt around her, sensing that these were not just words but the final lesson from their guardian, the daughter of Nthuru. They watched as the glow from the sacred flame seemed to bend toward her, as if acknowledging its true keeper one last time. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke, mingled with earth and flame, and the shadows of the temple flickered in a soft, reverent dance. Amara settled herself in front of the eternal flame. She closed her eyes, her hands resting on the warm clay floor, and let the power that had defined her life swell one final time. The fire within her spirit, the ember that had guided justice, balance, and mercy, began to rise, slowly, lifting her body in a gentle spiral. Sparks danced around her like golden butterflies, catching the moonlight as they twirled higher and higher. The villagers gasped, unable to comprehend the beauty and majesty of the sight. Her mortal form began to dissolve, not in pain but in a radiant, luminous transformation. Every flicker of her hair, every shimmer of her skin, turned to a tiny, dancing ember. They rose toward the night sky, joining the eternal flame, carrying her essence across the heavens. The villagers could feel the warmth in their bones, a soft, embracing heat that left no sting, only comfort. When the first rays of dawn touched the village, Amara was gone. Where she had sat, only a circle of glowing embers remained, small, steady, and unyielding in their warmth. No smoke, no heat of destruction, only the gentle, eternal pulse of fire that seemed to breathe with life. The villagers gathered around, understanding that this was not an end but a continuation. With reverent hands they built a shrine around the circle, honoring the spirit of Amara, the keeper of the eternal flame. They vowed that as long as they lived, they would maintain the fire, tending it with respect, teaching their children its lessons, and remembering that true power lies in balance, wisdom, and the purity of the heart. From that day onward, the final ember burned in the heart of Kamara, a living legacy, a testament to the girl who feared fire, the spirit who commanded it, and the guardian who taught generations to honor it. Travelers from distant lands would come to witness it, leaving with awe in their hearts, understanding that the flame was not merely a miracle, but a symbol of the eternal bond between life, spirit, and the soul that dares to walk through fire unburned. And so, Amara's spirit lived on, not in flesh but in fire, eternal, unwavering, and forever the guardian of the balance between flame and humanity. Generations passed, and the story of Amara, the daughter of Nthuru, became woven into the very fabric of Kamara. The village, once scarred by fear and ashes, now thrived under the memory of the fire that had both judged and healed. Farmers, before lighting their torches at dawn, whispered prayers to her, invoking the fire woman's blessing to guide the flames with care and truth. Mothers told their daughters, sitting beside warm hearths, "If you are ever wronged, let your fire burn with truth, not hatred." On stormy nights, when lightning split the sky and fire danced across the heavens, villagers swore they could see her silhouette in the blaze. A figure cloaked in embers, walking with grace and purpose, reminding them that fire was never mere destruction, it was a mirror of the soul. Children would point to the horizon, eyes wide with wonder, asking their elders if Amara was watching. And the elders would smile knowingly, nodding as if the wind itself carried her presence. The village's annual festival had transformed over the decades. No longer did they burn victims to appease gods or test souls. Instead, the streets filled with soft golden lamps, each flame a blessing, a prayer, a symbol of protection and gratitude. The villagers danced around them, their faces aglow with joy rather than fear. The pyres of judgment had been replaced with the gentle radiance of hope. Storytellers traveled from nearby lands to Kamara, recounting the tale of the girl who had once trembled at a candle, who had been betrayed, bound and judged unfairly, yet rose to command the fire itself. Their voices painted her journey in vivid strokes. The flames that refused to burn her, the power she wielded over the corrupt, the warmth she bestowed on the innocent, and the wisdom she left behind. Audiences listened, enraptured, learning that the fire they feared was never meant to destroy, but to reveal the truths hidden within their own hearts. Elders would lean close to the children, their hands pointing to the sacred flame temple, where the eternal embers still burned. "Remember," they said, "the fire in the world is like the fire in you. Only when it is guided by justice, love, and balance will it illuminate, not destroy." And the children, carrying these lessons in their hearts, would grow into the next generation of caretakers, guardians not only of Kamara but of the spirit of fire itself. Legends told that when lightning struck the tallest trees or split the rocks in distant mountains, a glowing figure appeared for a fleeting moment. Amara, walking among the flames, watching over the village. She had become immortal not in flesh but in fire, a presence that reminded mortals that even the smallest ember could hold the power to judge, to protect, and to awaken the soul. And so the villagers whispered, generation after generation. They tried to burn her soul, but she became the fire that judged them all. Her name carried respect, fear, and love, not as a tyrant, not as a vengeful spirit, but as the ultimate guardian of balance. Every spark that flickered in Kamara, every warm light in the darkness bore her mark. The fire woman lived in stories, in lessons, in festivals, and in the hearts of those who understood that fire, like the soul, reveals its true nature when faced with courage and integrity. The legend endured, eternal as the flames themselves, and the people of Kamara knew this truth. The fire they once feared was never meant to consume, only to reveal what burned within.